Greetings, students, and welcome to chapter number 2. So happy chapter number 2. This is going to be a much more brief explanation of a chapter than we had in chapter 1, because chapter 1 is necessary to capture a foundation of nutrition. Chapter 2 focuses on the various guidelines that we're using to guide people in their nutritional choices. So we are going to have a couple of questions on the exam, and it is important for you to understand what guidelines do for us and why we have a few different types of guidelines. However, again, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on chapter number 2. All right, so again, we're going to be talking about the various guidelines that we use in the field of nutrition. So what do guidelines really do for us? Well, as I mentioned, we need some direction on how to make choices on the foods that we eat, and that's what guidelines do for us. Guidelines basically tell us what is recommended, how much is a minimum that we should be getting of certain nutrients and foods, as well as how much might be harmful to us. And it's really the World Health Organization, the WHO, that establishes some international type guidelines, and we'll talk about a couple different kind that we have here in the US. So ChooseMyPlate.gov is an online program that you can go to right now, and this was established back in 2011, but basically what the government thought is, you know what, let's provide a visual for people to look at, because many of us are visual learners, myself included. I'm a visual learner. I like to see things. That is where I like to do videos for students, is because I connect visually, right? And so what we have here is a visual of a plate and of some dairy or some liquid product that you should be drinking. This is what we're recommending you have on your plate, which, as you can see, is half of a plate being filled with fruits and vegetables, which is contrary to what most of us were brought up with. Most of us think of a meal plate as having a big portion of protein with a starch and then maybe a little vegetable, right? And some bread, right? And so we're really kind of changing what that looks like. But this is an example, again, of a program that we use called ChooseMyPlate.gov. All right, so DRIs. So DRIs basically is this set of guidelines that says, okay, we're going to look at how much food you should be eating, but we're also going to look at how much might be harmful to you. So we're going to look at how much you should eat and how much you should stay away from. Right? Okay, and here we see various different types. I'm not going to go through and make you memorize and understand, you know, all these different types of guidelines that we have. For those of you who are interested in becoming dietitians or nutritionists in the future, these are things you will explore in upper division classes, but for our purposes, we're not going to really know that. We need to remember a couple different ones, and one of them is called RDAs. Most of us grew up following the RDAs, right? Recommended Dietary Allowances. And what that means is, through research, we know that this is what we would recommend to the population. And when we recommend that you have this percentage of a vitamin or mineral or nutrients, we know we're capturing almost everyone. So if we follow the RDAs, we get about 97 to 98% of our population being healthy if they follow these guidelines. Right? And that's what the goal of the RDAs was. It was to say, here's a minimum that we want you to have. And if you max out or you get to this minimum, most of us will be healthy. That was the goal here, right? RDAs is what we use to set our meal planning for our public education system and for most of our various school type functions. So we use these guidelines because we know statistically they're capturing, again, 97, 98% of the population. And so if we follow these guidelines, we're targeting almost everyone to be healthy. And so our school lunches, school breakfast programs, all those programs are based on the RDAs, right? When we talk about ULs stand for Tolerable Upper Intake Levels. And this is when we start talking about when a supplement or something might be harmful to you. So let's say the mineral zinc. There is definitely, with any of our minerals or supplements, we have concerns about having too much of something. And so we would want to make sure that you don't exceed what we call the ULs, because the ULs are an upper level that says if you have too much of something, it gets to be toxic for your body, and we don't want that, right? And for most of us here in the West or in America, we don't have to worry too much about ULs, right? For most of us, we're not going to get to toxicity levels unless we take supplements, right? So supplements, I mean vitamins and minerals, I mean pills instead of actual natural food that we're taking to supplement our diet or to give us something in excess. And we'll talk more about them later, but in general, most of us don't have to worry about getting too toxic levels unless we're popping a lot of supplements or pills for a particular vitamin or mineral, right? All right, I'm not going to go through this, but as you can see by this picture here, what we're saying is the EAR is kind of the average for most people, but the RDA says, I want to make sure that we capture 98% of our US population, make sure that they're getting those nutrients they need. And then over here we have the ULs, which says way out here, now these different nutrients or vitamins or minerals can become toxic. All right, again, our food is going to convert to energy, but I'm not going to talk a lot about how we need to be aware of that or get into being able to calculate those different types of things. Here we know we'll talk a lot about being physically healthy, and the way we do that is to balance our calories, right? We need to make sure that our intake is good for what we're putting out. Here we see a slide of kind of some ideas of what we should be eating. This is where we kind of fail. A lot of us fail here. So when we talk about our grains, we see that we should be eating at least 3 ounces of whole grains, right? We tend to not do that. When we have our mashed potatoes or French fries, or we have our sourdough bread, all of those things, none of them are whole grain, right? They're not. They are going to convert to glycogen, or they're going to convert to sugar in our body eventually, right? Those are carbohydrates that convert to sugar. And they're not the healthiest for us, whereas whole grains would be a lot healthier. And so we'll talk about how to select whole grains and other foods that are going to be better for us in our diet. But this is important to read and go through because you're going to understand physically, like in our activity level, as well as the foods we should be eating and how both of those really lead to a healthy, optimal, balanced weight. All right, healthy eating patterns. Yeah, we can see here again, we want foods to choose foods that have a lot of nutrients in them. Here in the West in America, we tend not to. We tend to choose a lot of foods that are empty calorie foods. And so we'll learn more about how to make those choices. Again, looking at the MyPlate picture here, we see that, you know, we've talked a little bit about what we should have on our plate and what we shouldn't have, which means we need to be careful about our sodium or our salt consumption because salt's really bad for us. And here in America, we tend to like flavorful, salty food. And so we tend to use table salt, meaning use your salt shaker to put salt on your food on top of all of the processing of salt that goes on in making a lot of our food. So we'll talk more about that. What I want you to remember is that not only when we talk about being healthy do we think about our nutrients, but we need to think about our physical activity. And I'm going to talk a lot about that this semester because I'm a big believer that we need to be physically active, especially as we get older, right? So the ChooseMyPlate.gov recommends 150 minutes of pretty moderate to severe physical activity per week. So you're looking at 5 days a week at 30 minutes or shorter time frame at more minutes, okay? And I don't mean that you're just taking a stroll down the street. I mean, you're hoofing it, right? If you're going for a walk, I want you to be walking at 3 miles per hour. You should be able to do about 3 miles in 1 hour, right? So in 1 hour, walking 3 miles per hour, you will be going at a fast pace walking, but that is going to be the healthiest for you. So that's what we mean, doing some good exercise. All right. Keep in mind that when we talk about kind of the average daily adult diet, or when we talk about daily values, we're basing them on a 2,000 calorie diet. For most of us, that's kind of the norm. So when we look at choosing our foods and different calories for the day, we want to max out around 2,000. Now, there's different situations here. For instance, I was at the restaurant with my family a few days back, and my son, who's 16, so he's a growing adolescent boy. He's 16. He chooses the ultimate platter plate, which is 1,200 calories in that one sit-down meal, right? When we go out to eat, a lot of our food contains a lot of excess calories. And so you can literally eat half or more of your diet for the day in one meal. Now for my son, I don't worry about it because my son happens to play water polo, right? And so he is in the pool for 3 hours, 5 days a week, doing strenuous swimming and water polo in which you tread water all the time. He basically burns about 2,000 calories a day doing that, which means that his total calories is more like 4,000 per day, right? So for him to sit down and have 1,200 calories in a meal, that's okay because he's in a different category. He's actually trying to increase his intake because he expends it in energy that he uses. So think about that. If you're physically active in some type of sport or activity, if you're expending that energy, you need to take in more to be able to fuel your body, right? So there's going to be situations where the 2,000 doesn't apply. However, when we look at our recommendation, they're all based on the 2,000 number. So if it says something like, well, we should be getting a certain number of grams of vitamin A, and it says maybe 5 grams of vitamin A per day, if that's based on a 2,000 calorie diet, then people like my son should be getting 10 grams per day, right? Because they're doubling that calorie intake. So for the test though, for the exam, need to remember, these values are all based on a 2,000 calorie per day diet. All right, so I want you to look through this and start to get some ideas and examples of diets and kind of what's healthier than others. You're gonna be exploring your own diet shortly for our diet study analysis. All right, so where do our empty calories come from? When we talk about empty calories, we mean when you eat something that has 400 calories, but it had pretty much like zero nutritional value. It had lots of sugar in it, and it had lots of fats, solid fats, and that's what gave it the 400 calories, right? And so again, we talked about donuts and all of these things on the right-hand column, you can see not as healthy as the things on the left-hand column. And this is where we need to start being aware of our food choices and what we're eating, right? All right, so food labels. You're going to want to understand food labels because, number one, we're going to have an assignment or an activity in which you're going to use or have to read food labels. Also, it's going to help you to be a better consumer in choosing food, and it's going to help you be healthier because you're going to be able to understand what do our labels mean. How do I read a food label? What does it mean? What's on it, right? So if you look here, you can see, number one thing it usually tells you is a serving size. So I have to explain to people that if you are going to make a bag of microwave popcorn, and if you look at the label on the microwave popcorn, you're going to see it's going to say a serving size is 1 cup. All right. So if I'm looking at taking a cup of popcorn, well, then the numbers might say something like 1 cup of popcorn has, 12% or 12 grams of saturated fat. Okay. However, if I'm planning on eating the whole bag of popcorn, well, that bag may have 7 cups in the entire bag, right? So what I need to do is take the number 7 and multiply that times 12 grams of saturated fat. And then I come up with the total number of grams of saturated fat I eat if I sit down and just have fun with my whole bag of microwave popcorn. Right? So understand serving size because it makes all the other numbers very different if you eat more than the serving size, right? And then again, this is pretty self-explanatory. It's going to really explain to you if there are any vitamins and minerals, what is the sugar content, what is the fiber content, all of these different types of aspects of a label, right? And again, our label values are based on that 2,000 calorie diet. Right, one of the things to understand when we talk about labels, right, so we were looking a minute ago at what this label is here. However, there's also a section on the package, right, all of our packages that says ingredients, right? And so a lot of us will look at these ingredients because I want to know, Is there red number 40 in this item? Did you put food coloring in my food? Is there preservatives in here? What's in what I'm eating? But what I want you to understand is that when kind of by law, or the way that the FDA makes companies list ingredients, is by weight. So it's not in order of importance, or it's not in order of the number one item that has the most nutritional value is number one. If we look at this container right here of a juice pack, we see that the first ingredient listed is water. So you might go, oh, wow, this has a lot of water in it. This is good for me. No, because you look at the second ingredient, right? The second ingredient is high fructose corn syrup, which we know to be something that is not healthy for you at all. And what we see, the reason that we see water listed as number one is because it's the heaviest in weight. So the water in that package is what's carrying the most weight of the 8 ounces of drink or liquid that's in the package. That's why it's listed first. But we cannot look at this label or ingredient label and say, oh, this is a good item because water is number one. It must have a lot of water in it, which I know is good for me, right? So be very aware to understand that ingredients are listed by weight. And so it's not always going to be the most nutritional item that's first. Or if you see something like whole grains as the first item, that might be good. We need to look at the rest of what's contained here. And we continue to look at this particular item. We see lots of different juice concentrates. And anytime you have juice concentrates, you're going to have a high volume of sugar in your item, right? Right. Again, learn to compare items, right? My family only drinks fat-free milk. And if by accident or by some occasion we happen to drink a whole milk, we feel like we're drinking cream. It's like, what? This is not milk. This is cream. I'm drinking cream. Because for us, it feels like it's so thick because we're not used to that type of milk. We're used to a fat-free milk. But look at the difference in labels here. Fat-free milk, you're going to see, has basically no fat. If we look at whole milk has not only fat, but 25% saturated fat. And we'll talk more about why that's not ideal for you. So in general, my family does not drink whole milk. We drink fat-free. However, when I do my baking, I mentioned to you, I'm a baker. That's my hobby. When I bake, I always use whole milk for my baking because I want the fat in the milk to actually incorporate with other ingredients that I'm putting together. And in general, I'm not making something healthy. When I bake, I've never made anything healthy. I am understanding that the item I'm baking is going to be a treat. It's going to be a sweet treat. I'm not concerned about using fat-free milk. It won't taste the same as it will if I use whole milk, right? All right, dietary supplements. What we mean by that is vitamins and various items that you can find at the store, right? So a lot of us will take a multivitamin. Also vitamin C, fish oils are really popular. All kinds of different supplements that we can take. And you can see the labels here. And on the label, it will frequently tell you how many of them you need to take. So for instance, my kids' vitamins, they get those kind of gummy Flintstone or chewy vitamins or whatever they are. They need to have 2 per day in order for them to get the full nutrients listed on the label. So understanding, again, how many you should be taking to get that. We'll talk more about supplements later. I am a believer in supplements, so I take a handful, and I'll explain later like how they can help you in your diet, right? For individuals such as myself who are over 50, we lose certain nutrients as we get older, and we're going to need to replace that. And sometimes a way to do that is with supplements. All right, so understanding labels. Okay, read through this and understand a lot of the items that you pick up in the grocery store. If you do the grocery shopping, you look and you go, oh, it says healthy. Well, what does that really mean? Like what legally can they can use this word, as you see here, healthy can legally be used on a product when it's low in fat, saturated fat, sodium, cholesterol, and the product contains adequate levels of at least one selected nutrient. However, if you compare it to other items, you're going to see that that word is not always going to be something that's going to be ideal. In other words, there's a lot of soups that will say they're healthy. If you still read the label, you're getting a tremendous amount of sodium in all soups. All right. Again, lots of different claims. go through and read what our different nutritional companies and organizations are putting down. Nutritional assessments, this would be a kind of an example of what a dietitian would do with clients, is we're going to need to figure out what are you eating, and then determine or assess what is lacking or what do we have in excess. This is going to be something that you will be doing for your 3-day diet study. You are going to be keeping a log of everything you eat for 3 days, and then we are going to find out exactly how healthy or not so healthy that is. Again, most of us understand we also do a lot of blood tests and other testing to determine what is our glucose level, what is our cholesterol level. All of those different things are very important. And your genetic history or your family history is important, right? So if you have a family member that has diabetes, type 1 or 2, then you are more at risk of developing those different conditions. And so we'll talk, that plays a role into your future. However, lifestyle choices also plays a huge role. Okay? And then again, we mentioned, so what's the purpose of these DRIs? Remember, we have the RDAs, which are those recommended dietary allowances, which is kind of meeting the needs of 97 to 98% of the population. And then beyond the RDAs, we have what we call DRIs. And the DRIs, they don't just look at minimums, they look at what's the maximum, because we don't want you to get sick because you have toxic levels of something in your system, right? So that's the DRIs, right? So we would see here that basically D is the answer. They expand on the RDAs to address excesses or having too much, as well as not enough, being deficient in something. What is true about the ingredients in a food label, right? So remember we said how they're listed on a food label and what order they're listed has to do with weight. So it's B. They're listed by weight, not by importance or prominence, but how much something weighs, which may or may not mean that that item is central to the food that you want to purchase. As we saw with the juice, water was not, you're not going to walk away getting a whole lot of water. You're going to walk away getting way too much sugar and other things in that item. Okay, so again, this was a real brief chapter on understanding guidelines and food labels. Make sure to look at it and review it, because again, we will have a couple activities that have to do with guidelines and looking at food labels. All right, see you next time.